It feels like America is just completely split apart, right? More divided than ever. But what if the way we're all looking at that division is, well, just flat out wrong? We're going to dive into a study called Hidden Tribes that totally redraws the map of America. And I got to tell you, what it found is pretty surprising. I love this quote. It comes right from someone in the study, and it just nails the whole idea. Think about it. We're always hearing about the frayed ends of the rope, the extremes just pulling and pulling and pulling. But what about the middle? Is that center really as weak as the news makes it out to be? And that, right there, is the big question, isn't it? I mean, we are constantly told it's just a 50-50 split, red versus blue, a country just torn right down the middle. Well, this whole study basically says, nope, that's not it at all. Okay, so let's start with the story we're all familiar with. I mean, it's the one that's blasted at us from our screens, it's all over our feeds. This idea of a nation with two warring tribes just locked in this endless fight. And look, it's a simple story. It's dramatic, it gets clicks. But the Hidden Tribes research suggests it's also really, really misleading. And getting to the bottom of why it's misleading, well, that's the first step to actually changing the conversation. All right, so here it is, the big reveal. This is the new map. And instead of just two tribes, the study found seven totally distinct groups. And here's the kicker. They're not defined by the usual stuff, like your age or income. They're defined by their core beliefs. And boom, here they are. Right away, you can see how that whole 50-50 idea just crumbles. I mean, just look at the size of these slices. The groups we hear from the most, the super ideological wings, the progressive activists, and the devoted conservatives, they're actually some of the smallest pieces of the pie. And each one of these tribes, they've got their own unique personality, all shaped by those core beliefs we just mentioned. You've got the super engaged activists on the ends, and then these much bigger, kind of more detached groups in the middle. As we go through these, I bet you'll start to recognize people you know, maybe even yourself. Okay, so this is absolutely crucial to understand. The way they figured out these tribes wasn't by asking, how old are you, or what's your race, or how much do you make? No, it was about something much deeper. They called it the hidden architecture of our beliefs. Our fundamental take on big things like authority, morality, and where we feel like we belong. So, if there are really 7 of these tribes, then who the heck is driving all the conflict we see 24/7? Good question. To figure that out, we've got to zoom in on the two groups at the absolute polar opposites of the spectrum. Okay, now look at this. This is wild. The progressive activists and the devoted conservatives, the two groups that are by far the loudest and least willing to compromise, together, they make up just 14% of the country. Let that sink in. That means a whopping 86% of America is somewhere else. And wow, this shows you just how deep that divide between those two groups really is. I mean, we are talking fundamentally opposing worldviews on everything from how you should raise your kids to what the basic structure of society should even be. It's really no wonder they seem to be at war all the time. Let's take a really hot-button topic, right? White privilege. You literally could not get more opposite answers. I mean, look at those numbers. This is a perfect example of what happens when two groups are operating from totally different core beliefs. They are living in completely different realities. Okay, but if those two wing groups are just 14% of the population, then who is everybody else? This, my friends, is maybe the biggest takeaway from the whole study. It's time to meet the exhausted majority. 67%. That's 2/3 of the country. Just take a second and let that number sink in. 2 out of every 3 Americans fall into this group. These folks are not on the ideological extremes. They are the strong, solid center of that rope we were talking about at the beginning. Now, this exhausted majority is actually made up of 4 of our 7 hidden tribes. And while they're all different, they share one huge thing in common. They are just plain tired of the constant division. They're fed up with politics. And generally speaking, they're a lot more flexible and less rigid in their own opinions. And here is the proof, right here in the data. A solid 65% of them believe that their own side needs to compromise more. Now, compare that to the wings, where it's less than half. That is a massive difference. The desire to find common ground is absolutely there. It's just getting drowned out by all the shouting. And this quote from somebody in that politically disengaged group just perfectly sums up how that exhausted majority feels. It's not really about this issue or that policy for them. It's about the toxic way we're all talking to each other or, not talking to each other.
So, okay, what does this all mean? Why does this new map of America even matter? Well, it matters a lot. Because you know the saying, you can't fix a problem until you actually understand what the problem is?
And this, right here, is the key takeaway. The big problem in America isn't that half the country is at war with the other half. No, the problem is that a very small, very loud, and very uncompromising minority is basically hijacking the conversation from a much larger, quieter, and more flexible majority. So what this new map does is give us a path forward. First, it shows us things are way more complex than just red versus blue. Second, it points to this huge potential for common ground, this desire for compromise. And maybe most important of all, it shows the exhausted majority that they aren't alone. In fact, they are the majority. And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on, doesn't it? If the vast majority of Americans are sick of the fighting and actually want to compromise, then why do things stay so divided? It makes you wonder, who exactly benefits from all the conflict?